Welcome to another baking session. Now, today, previously I've quite often quoted Cupcake Gemma, and actually it was on her YouTube channel that I came across a guy called The Boy Who Bakes, and I've got one of his recipes here today. So it's sort of via Cupcake Gemma, but it's not her recipe. So we're going to make a Neapolitan Marble Bundt Cake. So we're going to need a bundt tin, which I've got here, and we're going to prepare that in a second. But one of the things we're going to need is some white chocolate. Now I've got 75 grams of white chocolate here in a bowl, over a pan of water, and I'm going to melt that down because we're going to be needing that melted as part of the process. Okay, so we've got a whole array of things here. But before we get started, what I'm going to do is prepare the bundt tin. Now again, from him, found out how the best way of preparing your bundt tin to start with. What I've noticed, for instance, is when I use my spray, my oil spray, it sort of bobbles, if you like, and it's apparently because these are non-stick coating, like other pans where I do it, and you notice the same thing. And the surface is designed to prevent the oil sort of spreading uniformly. So if you used to spray your bundt tin, and it's an intricate one, with something like that, you're going to have patches where it's potentially the cake can stick. So what you have to do is use soft butter, because if you melt the butter, it's the same effect as putting oil on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to brush all over the pan, making sure, of course, that I get it all the way up the spout in the middle and in all the little nooks and crannies. Now this isn't a particularly intricate pan, if you like. He's using one that's much more intricate, and in those cases it's important that you get the butter all well mixed in. So I'm just going to get that nice and buttered, and I'll keep my eye on that chocolate melting down. So that's nicely buttered. Now the next thing is we just get something to just dust all over the inside of that. Now don't worry too much at this stage if you think you're getting too much in there, because we're going to get rid of the excess in a minute. I'm just going to dust all over, and then what we do is we turn it over and drop it on the surface, and that gets rid of all the excess. So that pan is now ready to go. So I'm obviously going to have to clean this flour up. The chocolate's still melting down. Now, another little tip for you before we start doing anything is, if you're going to use a stand mixer, or basically any bowl that we're going to do the original batter in, weigh it and record the weight. You'll find out why in a bit. So I've weighed that, 841 grams, recorded that. It'll just make life easier later. And the first thing we'll do is I'm going to take some butter. It's so nice and soft, 340 grams of that. That's going in there. And then to that, I'm going to add 450 grams of caster sugar. Now, where's my beater gone? Oh, conveniently put it where I find it and then couldn't find it. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to cream that together until it's all completely blended in, probably about 5 minutes, or until it's nice and light and fluffy. Okay. Oh, now if I turn to powder. So we'll get that done. The chocolate's still melting nicely, and I'll come back to you when we start blending in the eggs. So that's nicely beat together. I did give it a good scrape down. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to start it real gentle, and we're just going to beat in one at a time, except we just put 2 in there. Eggs. We want 6 large eggs going to go into this. So we want to make sure each one is fully incorporated before we move on to the next one. Okay. And again, we may need to just scrape down just to get it all mixed in. So it's just simply a matter of making sure all them 6 eggs nicely blended into it. Now all you're going to need left in that base batter, as it's called, is we're going to need some vanilla extract. And what we will be doing, just turn that up a little bit. What we will be doing shortly after that is splitting this, and each third, we're going to split in thirds, each third we're going to add some different things to get our 3-colour cake, if you like. So I'm just going to get all them eggs in. So they're nicely incorporated. Now I can't get it off the extract. And what I'm going to do is, when I get the lid off of this, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of that and then just briefly blend that all in, and then we're going to weigh, because we're going to split it into, well, initially we're going to take 1/3 out. So that's 1/3 of the batter there. Now into that I'm going to add some more flour. I've got 85 grams of flour. This is plain flour again. I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of salt, a tablespoon of baking powder, and then I've got some dark cocoa powder. I've got 50 grams of that. Okay, if you don't like dark cocoa powder, don't use dark cocoa powder, it's up to you. And then what we're going to do is we're going to blend that in, and also into that we've got 80 mils of sour cream, so that's going to go in there as well. Okay, and this is going to form our chocolate batter. Now this isn't our white chocolate batter, okay, this is our chocolate batter. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to fold that all together. Now you can fill your bundt tin by hand, you know, spoon at a time, but an easier way is to use a piping bag. Okay, just gives you that little bit more control. Now it doesn't matter whether these things don't sort of blend together, or rather whether they don't stay separate. You know, if they do start blending together in the bundt tin, you're going to get a bit of blending going on. Alright, but we want to sort of make it look almost like stripy, if you like. So the piping bags will just give you that little bit of extra control. So I'm just going to get that all blended in, and then I'll put it into a piping bag, because that will help prevent it drying out too much. Okay, the doughs that you make, they're going to go in these bundt tins, are sort of quite a bit firmer than your normal like sponge cake mix, so we don't want them firming up too much. So I'm just going to make sure I've got all of that in there, and then we'll be switching back to the rest of the batter. So there's my chocolate batter in there, ready to go. Just put that over there. Now we're going to start adding some more ingredients to this before we split it again. So now I've got 250 grams of flour, so that's going in. I've got in this one it's a teaspoon of salt, and this here is 2 teaspoons of baking powder, so in that goes. So we're now just going to blend them two together, and then we're going to split that into our final 2/3, and that's going to make our final 2 colours, if you like, to go into the rest with the chocolate. So I'm just going to make sure this is all nicely combined, and I'll get back to you. So I've split this again, and this time in this one I'm going to add that melted white chocolate, and we're going to blend that in, and again put that into a piping bag. So we'll just get that all mixed in into the piping bag, and then we'll get working on that final lot of batter. Now it's going to be going in the bundt tin, and then of course it'll be going into the oven. So oven 180, or if it's a fan like mine, 160. So that's the other piping bag. So this last bit, what we're going to add is some freeze-dried raspberry powder. Now, thanks to Amazon and their crappy search engine, which I don't know if you ever noticed, it's not very helpful. And what's exceptionally unhelpful is when you put in a search item and they like to slip in sponsored items that actually aren't what you've asked for. So I inadvertently bought freeze-dried strawberry powder. Now, it shouldn't make any real difference. The recipe actually called for raspberry. This is going to be strawberry flavoured. Thanks a lot, Amazon. So I've got 3, that's right, is it just double check? Yep, 3 tablespoons of that powder, in that goes. And then just to make sure we get a nice bright red colour, we're going to add in a nice quantity of food colouring. So blend this in, shove it in the piping bag, and then we'll be ready to start assembling our cake in the tin. Okay, so like I said, the oven's on preheating. Our bundt tin is prepared, it's buttered and floured. So let me get this all mixed in, get it in my bag, and we can get piping. So take one of my bags, and basically I'm going to put some batter in just a few places within the bundt tin, and then I'm going to add the other batter, and then the other. So what I'm creating is a sort of stripy effect, if you like, in the pan, and then I'm just gradually going to add more in. Okay, doesn't matter if it starts mixing in or blending in. Okay, so it's just a matter of keep building it up, a little bit at a time, until we've exhausted all the batter. So, got a bit of batter on me. So there we go, it's all in there. Okay, this is quite a big bundt tin, so it's not brimful, but that doesn't matter. Okay, it doesn't really matter what it finishes like, but what we want to do is make sure we've got it all settled down into it. So what we do is and that should make sure it's all settled down in it. So I'm going to put it on a tray just to help even the baking, and that's now going to go into the oven. Okay, and it's probably going to take about 55 minutes, but obviously we will test it with a skewer to make sure the skewer comes out clean. Now we're going to put a glaze on it. We put the glaze on it when the cake's hot. We're going to remove the cake out of the tin after it's cooled 10 minutes, when it should then release properly, but we'll talk a bit about that at the end. So that's going in the oven, 55 minutes ish, and I'm going to do that melting and washing up that there is. Okay, so I've got it out of the oven, and first thing we're going to do is shove it straight onto a wire rack, and we're going to set a 10-minute timer going, because we need, and in fact I'm just going to do just a fraction under 10 minutes, because we need it to cool slightly, because if you try tipping it out too soon, it's going to be a mess. Okay, but if we leave it too long, it will start binding to the surface of the thing, and then it's going to break when it comes out. So what we're going to do is put it on that wire rack. I've set a time for just under 10 minutes, and then after them 10 minutes we're going to tip it out, and at which point we're going to add a glaze. So we're going to use the 9 odd minutes we're waiting on now to prepare the glaze. So I've got 150 grams of icing sugar, and I'll add a teaspoon of vanilla essence, and we're also going to add a couple of tablespoons of milk. Okay, now we want this quite wet. Okay, but we don't want to go overboard with the milk to begin with. So we're just going to mix that in, and it wants to be quite a runny glaze. Okay, we add more milk if we need to, and when that's been turned out, what we do, and I'm going to have to add a little bit more milk, I think this is still a little bit stiff. What we do is we brush it all over, and if we do it while it's hot, it will tend to have that slightly translucent look as it dries. So I'm just going to keep adding that milk till I get that down to a nice runny consistency. Okay, it's almost there now, but a bit thick at the moment, and then we'll just use a pastry brush to brush it all over. Now, it did take a bit longer. I found particularly the red batter was still quite wet inside, so it had probably about an hour and 5 minutes in total. So just gauge it as you go. So I'll see you when I tip it out. So that's about 9 minutes. You can see it's pulled away a little bit from the edge, which I might use my bigger wire rack for that one, I think. You can see it's pulled away a little bit, well you can't. Okay, and what I'm now going to do is I'm going to tip it out onto the wire rack. Okay, let's give it a little bit of, and there you go. Perfectly removed by the looks of it. So I'm just over this tray now while it's still warm. We still need to let it cool down before we start trying to cut it. I'm going to take my pastry brush, and I'm now just going to brush this icing all over it. Okay, until I've basically gone over the whole cake, and then we're going to just finish it off with a nice little sprinkle of that freeze-dried raspberry powder, or rather in this case strawberry, which I have to say I did get a tang of. So if it's carried through, like I hope it has, into the cake, it does have, you know, it's not just there for colouring, it does have quite a nice little tang to it. So I'm just going to finish off glazing this. Like I say, we want to do it while it's hot, okay, and then we'll just let it cool. And then, like I say, the final thing, I'm just going to take some of that freeze-dried strawberry powder and just sprinkle a little bit of that over the top, just to add that last little bit of zing. So there we have our Neapolitan Bundt Cake, which unfortunately we're going to need to let it cool before I taste it.